The morning fog rolled across San Francisco's financial district as I stepped out of my modest Honda Civic, the heels of my comfortable flats clicking against the wet pavement. At 34, I'd learned that comfort trumped fashion when you had a day filled with back-to-back meetings ahead. My blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and I wore a navy blazer that had seen better days. Professional enough, but nothing that screamed CEO. I paused outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Meridian Tech Solutions, watching the stream of suited executives flowing through the revolving doors. This was it, the company I'd been tracking for months, the acquisition that would complete my expansion into the West Coast market. What they didn't know was that I'd been operating under a shell company, keeping my identity carefully hidden throughout the preliminary negotiations. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. My company, Hartwell Industries, had grown from a small software startup I founded in my garage 7 years ago to a multi-million-dollar enterprise. But looking at my reflection in the polished elevator doors, I looked more like someone's assistant than a Fortune 500 CEO, and that was exactly how I preferred it. "Excuse me, are you here for the meeting with the Hartwell representatives?" A young receptionist with perfectly manicured nails looked up from her desk as I approached. "Yes, I am," I replied simply, not bothering to correct her assumption. "Oh, you must be from the catering company then. The conference room is down the hall, third door on your right. The executives should be arriving soon." She gestured vaguely without looking up from her computer screen. I felt a familiar flutter in my stomach. Not nervousness, but anticipation. This wasn't the first time I'd been mistaken for someone other than who I was, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The glass ceiling might be cracking, but assumptions about women in business were as solid as ever. "Thank you," I said, making my way down the corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Bay Area. The conference room was impressive. A long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, with a presentation screen covering most of one wall. 3 men in expensive suits were already seated, papers spread before them like battle plans. "Coffee? Water?" I asked, settling into a chair near the back of the room. The oldest of the 3, a silver-haired man in his 50s who I had recognized as CEO Marcus Whitfield from my research, barely glanced up. "Just water, thanks, and make sure it's the bottled kind, not tap." I nodded, biting back a smile. This was going to be even more interesting than I had anticipated. 20 minutes later, the room had filled with 8 executives from Meridian Tech, their energy palpable as they prepared for what they clearly considered the most important meeting of their careers. I remained in my corner chair, occasionally refilling water glasses and observing the dynamics at play. Marcus Whitfield stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention. "Gentlemen, today marks a potential turning point for Meridian Tech. Hartwell Industries has expressed serious interest in acquiring our company, and from what I understand, they're prepared to make a substantial offer." "How substantial are we talking?" asked James Morrison, the CFO, his Brooklyn accent cutting through the room's refined atmosphere. "Initial discussions suggest somewhere in the range of $150 million, Marcus replied, and I watched as several faces around the table lit up with poorly concealed excitement. The third man, whom I had identified as head of operations David Chen, leaned forward. "What do we know about this Sarah Hartwell? I've tried researching her, but there's surprisingly little public information." "That's not uncommon for tech entrepreneurs who prefer to stay behind the scenes," Marcus said, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "What matters is that Hartwell Industries has the capital and the vision to take us to the next level. They've successfully acquired and integrated 12 companies in the past 5 years. I watched their faces as they discussed my company's track record, their merger and acquisition history, and their projected growth. Every fact they stated was accurate, clearly the result of thorough research. What struck me most was how they spoke about Sarah Hartwell as if she were some mysterious figure rather than a flesh and blood person. "Miss, could you dim the lights?" Marcus called out to me as he prepared to start his PowerPoint presentation, or about to begin. I rose from my chair and found the light controls, adjusting them to his specifications. As I walked back to my seat, I caught James Morrison checking his expensive Rolex. "Are the Hartwell representatives running late?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "They said they'd be here by 10:30, David replied, shuffling through his notes. "It's almost 11 now." "Maybe they're testing us," suggested Rebecca Walsh, the head of marketing, the only other woman in the room. I had to admire their professionalism, even as frustration began to show around the edges. These were successful people accustomed to punctuality and respect. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting right there, the person they were waiting for, invisible, in plain sight. Marcus began his presentation despite the absent guests, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd pitched to investors countless times. Meridian Tech has positioned itself as a leader in cloud-based solutions for small to medium-sized businesses. Our revenue has grown 300% over the past 3 years, and we're projecting another 40% increase this fiscal year. The slides were impressive, filled with charts and graphs that painted a picture of a company ripe for acquisition. As I listened, I made mental notes about their market position, their growth strategies, and their blind spots. This wasn't just due diligence anymore. It was reconnaissance. By 11:30, the tension in the room had become almost tangible. Marcus had finished his presentation and was now pacing near the windows, his earlier confidence replaced by barely contained frustration. "This is unprofessional," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If Hartwell Industries conducts business this way, maybe we should reconsider the entire deal." "Maybe there's been a miscommunication," Rebecca suggested, diplomatically. "Should we try calling their office?" James Morrison was already pulling out his phone. "I'll contact their representatives. This is ridiculous." I watched him dial, listened to him speak with my assistant back in Chicago, and observed the confusion spread across his face as he hung up. "They say the meeting is proceeding as scheduled," he announced to the room, "but when I asked to speak with Sarah Hartwell directly, they said she was in a meeting and unavailable." "Well, she's clearly not in a meeting with us," David said, his patience wearing thin. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. I could see the wheels turning in their minds, the calculations and recalculations about what this delay might mean for their careers and their company's future. "Maybe we should take a break," Rebecca suggested. "Give them another 30 minutes, then reassess." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We've already wasted an hour and a half. If Sarah Hartwell can't be bothered to show up for a $150 million acquisition meeting, then maybe she's not the kind of business partner we want." I felt a surge of something. Not quite anger, but a deep, familiar frustration. How many times had I been in situations where my worth was measured by others' perceptions rather than my actual achievements? How many times had I been dismissed before I'd even had a chance to speak? "Excuse me," I said, standing up from my chair. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me with the kind of polite attention typically reserved for service staff about to apologize for some inconvenience. "Yes?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he was in no mood for interruptions. "I think there might be some confusion about the meeting." "What kind of confusion?" James asked, his eyebrows furrowed. I reached into my purse and pulled out my business card holder, extracting a single card with deliberate precision. "I'm Sarah Hartwell," I said, placing the card on the mahogany table. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as 8 faces process this information, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. Marcus was the first to find his voice. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I said, "I'm Sarah Hartwell, CEO and founder of Hartwell Industries. I've been sitting in this room since 10 o'clock, listening to your presentation and waiting for someone to acknowledge that I might be more than just the help." The mahogany table suddenly felt like a chasm between us. Marcus Whitfield's face had gone pale, his hand frozen halfway to his coffee cup. James Morrison was staring at my business card as if it might suddenly reveal itself to be a forgery. David Chen was looking back and forth between me and the empty chairs at the head of the table, clearly trying to reconcile the image of a powerful CEO with the woman who had been quietly refilling their water glasses. "This is," Marcus started, then stopped, his usual eloquence deserting him. "Impossible," I suggested, my voice carrying just a hint of the steel that had gotten me through 7 years of building a company from nothing. "Unlikely, or just uncomfortable." Rebecca Walsh was the first to recover her composure. "Miss Hartwell, we apologize. This is clearly a misunderstanding." "Is it?" I asked, moving to the head of the table where Marcus had been standing. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like exactly what it is. A room full of successful executives who saw a woman in comfortable shoes and a modest blazer and assumed she couldn't possibly be the person they were waiting to impress. I could see them processing this, their minds working through the implications. These weren't bad people. They were products of a system that had taught them to expect power to look a certain way, to dress a certain way, to command attention in ways that felt familiar and comfortable. The presentation was excellent, by the way," I continued, settling into the chair at the head of the table. "Your growth numbers are impressive, and your market positioning is solid. But I have to say, the real education happened in the past 2 hours." Marcus finally found his voice again. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I got to see how your team operates when they think no one important is watching. I saw how you treat support staff, how you handle frustration, how you make assumptions about people based on their appearance." I paused, letting that sink in. "That tells me more about your company culture than any PowerPoint presentation ever could." The room was quiet except for the sound of David Chen nervously tapping his pen against his notepad. I could see the wheels turning in their minds, not just about the embarrassment of the situation, but about what this meant for the deal they so desperately wanted. "And what did you conclude?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I concluded that Meridian Tech has impressive technology and strong financial performance, but it also has some significant blind spots when it comes to recognizing talent and potential in unexpected packages. "Miss Hartwell," Marcus said, his voice thick with what I recognized as genuine regret, "I want to apologize, not just for the misunderstanding, but for the way I treated you. It was inexcusable. The question now," I said, "is what we do about it." The afternoon sun slanted through the conference room windows as I stood at the head of the table, looking out at the faces of 8 executives who had just received a masterclass in assumptions and their consequences. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Where there had been confident anticipation, now there was uncertainty, and yes, fear. "Let me be clear about something," I said, my voice carrying the authority that had built Hartwell Industries from a garage startup to a major player in the tech industry. "This isn't about revenge or making anyone feel small. This is about understanding what kind of company culture we'd be inheriting if this acquisition moves forward." Marcus Whitfield had visibly aged in the past hour, his silver hair somehow seeming grayer, his shoulders less square. "Ms. Hartwell, I want you to know that what happened today doesn't represent our values or our standard operating procedures." "Doesn't it?" I asked, not unkindly, but with the directness that had served me well in boardrooms across the country. "Because what I observed today wasn't malicious, it was unconscious. And unconscious bias is often more dangerous than deliberate discrimination, because it's harder to recognize and address." I walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker, writing 3 words: assumption, observation, action. "For the past 2 hours, you assumed I was support staff based on my appearance and behavior. You observed that I was helpful and unobtrusive, and you acted accordingly, politely but dismissively." I turned back to face them. "Now, imagine if I had been a potential client, an investor, or a key employee. How many opportunities might Meridian Tech have missed because of similar assumptions?" Rebecca Walsh raised her hand tentatively. "How do we fix this?" "That's the right question," I said, feeling a spark of hope. "And the fact that you're asking it tells me more about your character than the past 2 hours did." I returned to my seat at the head of the table, but this time, I wasn't the invisible woman in the corner. I was exactly where I belonged. Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling out my phone and opening my notes app. If Hartwell Industries moves forward with this acquisition, it will be contingent on implementing a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. Not just policies on paper, but real, measurable changes in how you identify, develop, and promote talent. What would that look like? David Shen asked, his earlier nervousness replaced by genuine curiosity. Unconscious bias training for all management level employees, diverse hiring panels, mentorship programs that pair senior executives with junior employees from underrepresented groups, and regular audits of promotion and compensation patterns to identify disparities. I could see them processing this, some nodding thoughtfully, others looking concerned about the implications for their established ways of doing business. Investment you're looking for isn't just financial, it's cultural, and that's often the hardest kind of change to implement. Marcus leaned forward. And if we agree to these conditions, then we move forward with the acquisition. Your team gets the resources and support they need to take Meridian Tech to the next level. And I get a West Coast operation that's committed to create an environment where talent is recognized regardless of what package it comes in. The room fell silent as they contemplated this. I could see the internal calculations happening, the weighing of pride against opportunity, comfort against growth. There's one more thing, I said. I saw several people tense up. I want to offer Rebecca Walsh the position of head of West Coast operations for the combined company. Rebecca's eyes widened. What? You were the only person in this room who suggested we might need to reassess our approach when things weren't going according to plan. You showed flexibility and critical thinking. Those are exactly the qualities we need in leadership. I stood up, gathering my simple purse and modest blazer. I'm flying back to Chicago tomorrow morning. You have until close of business today to decide whether you want to move forward with these terms. If you do, my legal team will be in touch to begin the formal process. As I walked toward the door, Marcus called out, "Ms. Hartwell." I turned back. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, and I'm impressed, not just by your business acumen, but by your grace in handling what could have been a much more embarrassing situation for all of us. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd worn since entering the building. Marcus, the most successful acquisitions aren't just about buying companies. They're about bringing together people who can learn from each other. Today, you learned something important about assumptions, and I learned that Meridian Tech has people who are willing to admit when they're wrong and work to do better. I paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. Next time you're waiting for an important meeting, you might want to actually look at the people who are already in the room. You never know who might surprise you. As I walked back through the lobby of the gleaming tower, past the receptionist who had directed me to the catering entrance, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a deal well negotiated. But more than that, I felt hopeful. Change was hard, but it was possible. And sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply show up as yourself and let the world adjust its assumptions accordingly. The fog had lifted from San Francisco's financial district, and the afternoon sun painted the city in golden light. My Honda Civic was waiting in the parking garage, modest and reliable, ready to take me back to the airport. Tomorrow, I'd be back in Chicago, running my company from behind a desk in an office that had my name on the door. But today, I'd reminded myself and 8 other people that power doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the corner, waiting for the right moment to speak up.